His fall from grace was spectacular. Once Russia's richest man, he was thrown into jail for a decade on what he and many others believe were trumped-up charges, apparently at the behest of Russian President Vladimir Putin. Well, Mikhail Khodorkovsky has made no secret of his wish to see revolution in Russia, nor any secret of his intent to help bring that about. Mikhail Khodorkovsky is my guest on The Global Conversation. Many thanks for being with us. Some might say you're courageous, others downright foolhardy, because after 10 years in prison colonies in some of the remotest parts of Siberia, you still seem so intent on taking on President Vladimir Putin.
I'm not taking on the president, but the system that he embodies. I think that Russia deserves better.
Well, you're working behind the scenes now, supporting a political opposition. Is there now an alternative to President Putin's rule, his hold on power in Russia?
Well, first of all, I'm not working from behind the scenes. I'm quite openly declaring my position. Secondly, I think that we should not overestimate the role of Vladimir Putin in the system in which he embodies. We know this system. It's just the usual autocratic system. It was like this in the times of general secretaries of the Communist Party. When Stalin, who was quite different from Putin, was leaving his position, on his death, lots of people were crying and saying, "Oh, who can replace him?" And there was no problem. And I think the alternative today exists as well. Our task, my task, is to do everything possible to make this alternative democratic.
И думаю, что такая альтернатива сегодня тоже существует. Наша задача, моя задача сделать все возможное, чтобы эта альтернатива была демократичной.
This is going to be a long-term job, one can only imagine, given the situation in Russia today. Do you ever see yourself returning to Russia and challenging President Putin for the presidency?
Я, несомненно, вернусь в Россию, но вопрос...
Without a doubt, I will go back to Russia, but the issue of what position to take or not, I'm not interested in right now. I think what's important is to have a political team that can support the necessary reforms after the regime change. This is something that we did not have at the beginning of the 1990s, and this is something that under my very eyes brought about these very difficult consequences.
Что на моих глазах привело к достаточно тяжелым последствиям.
So you're not ruling it out then?
Я не только не исключаю.
I'm not only not ruling it out, I'm absolutely sure that I will be coming back to Russia. But now is not the right time to discuss who will occupy what positions in the post-Putin Russia. Today our task is to put together a team that will be able to lead necessary reforms in the transition period in order to organize our first fair elections. That is a task that I'm setting myself. In 2 years between the end of the regime and the first fair elections, that's the time for this reform team to work. And my present-day task is to form this team.
Отработать команда реформ. Ее формирование – моя сегодняшняя задача.
Okay, well, anyone who's involved in Russian politics obviously has to pronounce themselves on the issue of Crimea, whether it should be returned to Ukraine. Now, this is a bit of a hot potato for the opposition. Where do you stand on that? Very clearly, do you think Crimea should be returned to Ukraine?
Сразу после захвата Крыма я выступал.
Immediately after the annexation of Crimea, I spoke in Ukraine and said that this was a completely illegal action and that it's not possible to behave like this in today's modern world. But what's happened has happened, and today this is a long-term problem. Yes, it's a very important problem from the point of view of Ukraine. Yes, it's very important from the point of view of the world. Yes, of course, for Russia, this has become a sort of point of no return. But it's behind us now, and the government that will be solving the issue of Crimea will need the people's permission.
Проблему Крыма должно иметь на это санкцию от общества. И это может произойти
This
только...
can only happen after the first fair elections. Once fair elections are held, a new government has a mandate given to it by its people, then that government will have to solve the problem. I have my vision on the situation, but I know it won't be solved in the transition period.
Okay, so that doesn't sound like a particularly clear response. My question, you could just answer me with a yes or a no. Do you think that Crimea should be returned to Ukraine? If you were in the position where you could do that, is that what you would do?
I understand that you're in the paradigm of Putin's Russia and you want to have this decision taken by one person. I'm vying for another Russia, a democratic one, where no one is able to say, I'll do this like that, before he gets a mandate from society to do so.
This is quite true, but we know what a popular question this has been, that when Crimea was annexed, so we can only think that in that case it will stay with Russia. It's not going to be possible to reverse this from what you're saying.
Сейчас общество уже гораздо менее интенсивно.
There's less intense discussion on the issue in society today, and from my point of view, it's much more balanced. There are different points of view. Naturally, my views and the views of my supporters are based on the fact that this was an illegal action. We need a solution to the problem, and this solution should take into account the opinions of people living in Crimea without a doubt, but also Russian citizens and Ukrainian citizens. I don't think there'll be a quick solution to the problem, but I'm sure it will be found.
So anyway, let's move on to a different topic now, because you have said that you do count on returning to Russia at some point. But how do you think Russians nowadays, how do they see you? Do they see you in your former role as an oligarch, or are they now aware of the Mikhail Khodorkovsky that I see in front of me now?
I hope that opinions of Russians, which are today formed essentially by effective propaganda, be it about myself or about much more important problems, like, for example, the relations with the outer world, these opinions will change. I very much hope people will see me as a human being, as I am now, after 10 years in prison, and after what I would call exile. But all this is much less important than the issue of how they will see their own future. I would like my compatriots to see their future not embodied by a single person, whoever he is, but the future in a democratic country, with a normal parliament, with division of powers, where life is defined by the people themselves. This is how I see our task for the long term.
Having said that, though, in the short term, you're facing accusations of murder in Russia. Your name is being tarnished. You're going to have to be able to clear your name. How can you clear your name in Russia?
I'm not concerned with what Kremlin propaganda is saying about me. Russian citizens in general are rather skeptical about television, and the louder the noise from the empty fridge, the less attention they pay to their TVs. But even the most trustful person would ask the authorities, what new things have you learned about Khodorkovsky now, 18 years after the events in question, knowing that 15 out of those 18 years, Khodorkovsky was in your hands? What new things have you learned? Let's see if there's an answer to this question. If the answer is zero, as it was before, then trust will be zero.
Ходорковский находился в вашем полном распоряжении. Посмотрим. Если ответ на этот вопрос как по-прежнему будет оставаться нулевым, ну и доверие будет нулевым.
So you are still, though, whether you like it or not, you still do remain a symbol of the former oligarch class of Russia. How influential is that class of oligarchs now in Russia today? Do they exert influence?
У меня ощущение, что вообще мнение о влиятельности олигархии...
In my view, the idea itself that Russian oligarchs are influential was successfully put into the heads of Russians and also funnily in the heads of our Western colleagues by Boris Berezovsky.
На самом деле,
But in reality, Russia is a completely different country. It's the power or authorities who are in charge of money in our country, but not the other way round.
но не деньги формируют власть. И с этой точки зрения...
So, neither in Yeltsin's times nor in Putin's times have rich people had much influence over political decisions.
Во всяком случае, на политические
That's
решения.
why the attempt to pressure Putin's inner circle with sanctions into telling him what to do, this attempt was doomed to failure from the beginning.
Путина оказать на него некое воздействие, оно было заранее обречено
Of course,
на
these sanctions tied the hands of Putin himself, depriving him of the possibility to reward his cronies. This is how it works, but not the other way around.
перестали позволять вознаграждать своих опричников. Это действительно оказало влияние, но не обратное.
Really? And do you not think that what's happened to you, has that sent kind of waves of panic through these people? And even though you do say the opposite, they were quite influential to a degree in Russia, has what's happened to you sent waves of panic through this class of oligarchs in Russia? And outside of Russia, of course.
Я еще раз вынужден сформулировать свою позицию.
I would like to formulate my position once again. The rich people in Russia have never had any real power compared to the power of the Kremlin.
Я имею в виду в сравнении с властью Кремля.
The Kremlin of Yeltsin, the Kremlin of Putin defies the political behavior of the country.
То, как политически будет себя вести страна. И
And we have a saying with a meaning that roughly translates as, steel decides more than gold. This is how it works in Russia.
в России это действительно так.
Do you think that at one point in your life you think President Putin considered you a threat? Do you think he still considers you a threat now? You're in self-imposed exile?
Мне казалось, что в тот момент, в 2003 году,
I thought that, at the point in 2003, I was not a political threat to President Putin because psychologically I was part of the system.
был человеком системы, который думал о развитии промышленности, да, думал о
I thought
развитии
about the development of industry, and yes, I was thinking about the development of civil society, but I never thought about politics as an urgent issue for myself.
Казалось, что политикой занимаются какие-то другие люди. Выйдя из тюрьмы,
I thought that some other people were dealing with politics.
другим человеком. Для меня не существует бизнеса. Для меня
But once I left prison, of course, I was a different person. I don't care about business. Now I care about the future of Russia, and I know exactly how I want to see it. I want to see a future Russia as a democratic country, and I know what's needed for this, and how Putin judges the efficacy of my efforts. We can see in the pressure that the authorities exert on me.
Well, other people who've been in your position, other opposition politicians, have on occasion reached untimely ends. They've been assassinated. Do you fear for your own life?
Слушайте, я 10 лет своей жизни
Listen,
провел...
10 years of my life I spent in a prison barrack. I was stabbed with a knife, and I could have been killed any day with a very simple order from the Kremlin. Wherever I am today, I feel much safer than then, so I just don't think about it.
Я просто об этом не думаю.
And when we talked about these assassinations, these high-profile assassinations of opposition figures, there's been obviously a lot of conjecture as to where the order for that took place. Some say it came straight from the top. What do you think?
У меня нет информации
I've no information which would help me come up with serious charges against a concrete person.
Такие серьезные обвинения выдвигать против конкретного человека, но
But what's obvious is that this atmosphere of hatred, the atmosphere of looking for enemies, for the so-called fifth column, which is the result and, in a way, the core of the internal politics of the present Kremlin administration, led to these consequences. There's no doubt about it.
привела к вот таким последствиям. Это без всякого сомнения. То есть политическую
The
ответственность
political responsibility is without a doubt on Putin. Whether his direct order is behind it or somebody from his circle, we'll discover with time only, I hope.
в его окружении. Я надеюсь, время придет, и мы узнаем.
Well, meanwhile, President Vladimir Putin is extremely popular in Russia. One recent opinion poll put his popularity rating at 82%. Why is he so popular?
В России, к сожалению, богатая традиция
In Russia, unfortunately, there's a rich tradition of authoritarian leadership.
разговаривать даже внутри своих семей правдиво.
People are afraid to talk truthfully, even at home in their families.
С социологами, потому что всех их
And, of
подозревают.
course, nobody will tell the truth to sociologists or pollsters because everybody suspects them, and in some cases it's quite justified that they're connected to the FSB.
Сторона вопроса также хорошо
People
известна,
are afraid, and that's just one part of the issue.
судьба настолько полностью зависит
The second part is also well known. It's the hostage syndrome.
даже у себя в голове выражать ему преданность.
As people's fates are dependent on Kremlin bosses, they try even in their own heads to express loyalty to them. And of course, propaganda works perfectly.
Многих стран
These guys have honed their craft.
все меняется в один день. Вчера
But if you look at other countries, let's say Romania, everything can change overnight. Ceausescu had 92% popularity, and 2 months later, in the same region, he came to a very sad ending.
что нынешний
I just hope that the present regime will not bring the situation to those extremes.
крайностей. Я очень надеюсь,
I hope that the fear, from the West among others, and from some Russian citizens, this fear of change will not lead us to the catastrophic mistake of not understanding that these changes are inevitable.
не приведут к
So either you're ready for the changes or not, and if you're not, then you'll be overwhelmed.
И вы можете быть либо к ним готовы, либо не готовы. Тогда они вас просто накроют с головой.
Well, you talk about this, and at the same time in Russia, the economy has been severely battered, not only by the drop in oil prices, but also in sanctions. Now, you obviously have this deep wish for a revolution in Russia. Do you think the seeds of that, then, could be born from the economic hardship suffered by ordinary Russians?
Санкции имеют существенное символическое значение, но при этом мы прекрасно
The sanctions
понимаем,
have a rather symbolic meaning, but of course we all understand that if the Russian economy had a normal development, if we had today a normal quality of state management, not excellent, but just normal, then ordinary people would be living much better.
и цены на нефть не имели бы столь оглушающего.
Oil prices would not have this overwhelming influence that they have now.
Мы с вами прекрасно
Unfortunately, we both, you and I, know and understand that the modern star management is impossible when everything in a huge country is decided by one person.
сколько бы угодно умным он ни был,
He can be very intelligent, but if the society is not involved in the process of management, if there's no division of powers, if there are no normal state institutions, there's no hope for stability in the country.
то ни о какой
And if there's no stability,
реально
then there's no normal economy.
А если нет стабильности, нет нормальной экономики. Ну вот посмотрите сами.
Just look, how can Western countries negotiate with Putin?
Западные страны могут договариваться.
He's not responsible for what he's saying. His words are not supported by any solid normal institution. All the agreements that can be reached with him will only be short-term.
с ним только краткосрочные до тех пор,
They're working
пока
only till he guarantees it personally. His mood can change, he's human. So there's no solid institution. That's the main problem we have, not oil prices or sanctions.
Наша основная проблема, а не в ценах на нефть и не в санкциях.
Okay, but then just quickly, though, on that question of sanctions, do you think they should be lifted?
Я считаю, что этот вопрос решать Западу. Мы
I think
решим
that this
наши
question should be decided by the West.
будут санкции
We
или
will
их
solve
не будет.
our own problems independently of whether we have sanctions or we don't.
По отношению к России должна базироваться на
The policy of the
понимании
West
факта,
towards Russia should be based on the understanding of the fact that Russia can solve its problems only by itself.
он может
What can the West do?
помочь
It can help.
новой
It can assist the new Russian political elite to come into existence.
состояться.
It can help in preventing the political field in Russia from becoming completely barren, because later it will, God forbid, grow only poisonous plants.
Совершенно ядовитые семена. Вот в этом
This is where the
Запад
West can
может
help.
помочь.
But we can only solve the issues of Russia
Проблемы
by
всей страны в
ourselves.
целом мы можем только сами.
Well, Russia does seem to have carved out a very important role for itself, though, when it comes to the international scene, for example, in Syria. How do you feel about that?
Я об этом говорил публично и отстаиваю.
I've talked about it publicly many times, and I maintain my position today. I think we have enough internal problems. Syria, for the Kremlin regime, is not an attempt to have a positive influence on the world situation.
Какого-то позитивного влияния на ситуацию в мире. Это даже не отстаивание
This is not
российских
even about protecting Russian national interests.
защита
This is the protection of their own position, their own never-changing power. It's an attempt to transfer the attention of Russian society from the real problems to the virtual problems that exist for the Russian society only on TVs.
только в телевизоре.
So, because of that, Putin is not a reliable and long-term ally in Syria. He's solving his own problems, but not the problems of the world or the problems of Russia.
Проблему, а не проблему мира и не проблему России.
And finally, Mr. Khodorkovsky, we began by talking about your time in prison. It's obviously made you the man you are today. Could you share with us a particularly poignant moment of those times of incarceration?
В тюрьме я действительно провел 10 лет и в достаточно
I did spend 10 years in prison in quite harsh conditions. Of course, I've grown there, if only because I'm older now, and prison gave me time to rethink myself.
осмыслить себя. Сегодня для меня
Time does not have for me the same significance it had before. In prison, I learned to think in longer terms. So, possibly the most remarkable thing for me was the fact that Russia is a huge country.
Для меня был факт, что Россия, вот гигантская
I was
страна,
6,000 kilometers away from Moscow for part of my time there,
в 6
and also near the Finnish border.
другую часть своего тюремного
An hour's drive or so, or plane from Moscow, but in a different direction.
в часе от Москвы, но в другом направлении. Все люди,
But
даже находящиеся
all the
в тюрьме,
people,
люди не-
even the ones in prison, people from different walks of society,
Вот я приезжаю
all
в
people
Европу,
were of the
и
same
это
culture.
всё-таки, мир многокультурный. Там в одном месте это Германия.
When I
а
came to
переехал
Europe, I saw a multicultural world. I'm in Germany, and then after an hour's drive, you can be in a completely different culture and country like France. In Russia, you can fly for 7 hours, and the culture remains the same. This is a very important achievement of our country, and when they say that Russia shouldn't be that huge, that it should be divided, I really don't take that seriously. People who say that, they don't understand that we are just one whole entity.
насмешливо. Эти люди просто не понимают, что мы единое целое.
Mikhail Khodorkovsky, many thanks for having been with us on the Global Conversation.
Спасибо вам.